Hey everybody. It's the joy of wrestling. I wonder how long it's going to take me before I accidentally introduce this as the Dynamite Show. But luckily, I have a cheat sheet right in front of me that says the joy of wrestling on our screen. So I hopefully don't forget. But yeah, it's a brand new show. I want to thank you all for joining us here on the Fight Game Media YouTube channel. As of right now, this is the only way you'll be able to see this or hear it if you just want to listen. But my guest today is Kevin Ely from The Boom, soon to be returning, I guess, with the Revolution post show, which I guess you can talk about at the end of the show. But
Yeah.
before we get going, just wanted to kind of introduce the concept of this show for those that don't know. So a lot of times when we do the Dynamite show, or when you do the Boom, and and other shows, you're
Mhm.
talking about, we get into the minutia of wrestling.
Yes.
We kind of get upset about things, and WWE versus AEW, or New Japan this, or Stardom
Yeah.
that. And I just wanted to I just started thinking about why, when I originally became a wrestling fan, and it's not necessarily that, but it's things in my wrestling fandom over the years that have brought me joy. And originally I was going to call this show "If It Makes You Happy," but I thought that was a little bit too generic. So came up with "The Joy of Wrestling," because that's what I want this to be about, just the pure joy that people can get from watching professional wrestling.
Yeah.
And I wanted Kevin to be my first guest. Just because we're relatively similar age, but we
Mhm.
come from, we come from different parts of the world, kind of, but not
Kind of.
really.
Same
We're
side, but different part.
we're both central in our countries,
Yeah.
right? Like, you're central United States, I'm
Mhm.
central Canada. And but we grew up very different wrestling that we
Mhm.
watched. And I was When you first sent me what you sent me, that that was gonna be, I was a little bit surprised.
Really?
Just yeah, not that, like, I knew you were a big fan of the UWF.
Mhm.
And but I just, like, I don't know, I wasn't my experience with UWF was, we started getting it in about 1987. So it
Oh, yeah.
was about maybe 6 months to a year after the show that you're going to talk about today.
Mhm.
And what we got was basically just highlights of matches. It was almost like an NWA minor league show. I think Crockett had
Mhm.
already bought it. We never got NWA here, so this was my first exposure to people from Crockett. So
Oh,
the
wow. So you got the watered down version of both.
Exactly. Yeah. Now we did, and what would happen was, we would get certain things we would see over and over and over and over again. Like, um, who the champion at the time of this um, was it Terry Gordy?
Terry Gordy would be, yeah, with
Yeah.
the one I watched, the one I sent you. Yeah, Terry Gordy's the champ.
Yeah. So when I started watching, I believe it was Big Bubba
Probably
Rogers,
Big
but
Bubba,
then
yeah.
Steve Williams beat him almost
Mhm.
immediately after that. And
Yeah,
then
and I almost picked that because I was
okay.
I was in person at that show, and that's
Oh
one of my
wow.
favorite live memories, yeah.
Oh, cool, cool. Yeah, well, I mean, I saw that, basically just the running Oklahoma Stampede, like,
Mhm.
on every show, sometimes multiple times for like 3 months.
Yeah.
Like, and then
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
you would see the Bad Street USA video, like, over and
Yeah.
over again. So they were
Yeah.
baby faces by then,
Yeah.
and Sting was a baby face. So I was surprised to see Sting as a heel here, except
Mhm.
I don't think he was
It
much of a
wasn't really
heel,
much
but
of anything at that point.
no, no, we'll talk about that. But
Yeah.
yeah, so you picked the show. What was the date? It was August 23rd, 1986.
August 23rd. It would have been
Yeah,
taped August 17th.
yeah, I've got the card up here. Yeah.
They would do two tapings, they would tape 2 hours every 2 weeks
Okay.
at the same venue in Tulsa usually.
And were you at the taping?
No. So I lived in Oklahoma City, which is about an
Okay.
hour and a half south of Tulsa. And usually what we would do is they would either tape Saturday night and then do a Sunday afternoon show in Oklahoma City, or they would do Sunday afternoon Oklahoma City and then tape that night. So we would usually get like the house show right before the TV taping, which is
Okay.
part of why I picked this show. But I'll get to that after we kind of
Well, that's
talk about our
what I was
thing.
wondering, because when the show started, like,
Hmm.
it was basically like a brawl, like, that went
Yep,
on for a long time, and then there's a lot
that's
of
how it usually started.
talking. Yeah, and then I'm like, okay, what was it about this show that brought Kevin joy?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, as I started to watch it, I kind of started to figure out what it probably was. But
Yeah.
I'll kind of let you get into that. And I'm not sure if it's just that this particular show gives you a vibe that you remember, or if it was something about this
Hmm.
particular show of why you picked it.
Yeah. So I was deciding to pick like what's my first like joyful, when I look back on it, just pure joy of of when I first became a fan. And I started thinking, man, I haven't looked at some of those old UWF shows that I used to watch every week. So part of the reason why I picked UWF in general was, they were only really that good for about a year, and it was most of 1986. And uh, but at the time, it was like right when I was becoming a fan. I had missed the beginning of Hulkamania. Like the British Bulldogs got me into WWF,
You'd have been what,
but
15?
I would have been 14 at then. Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
14, and really into like comic books and stuff like that, and just started getting into wrestling. And my dad would watch after this was on Saturday nights at 10:30 after the local news. Instead of watching Saturday Night Live or whatever, my dad would turn it over, and they would have UWF and World Class back to back. And I
Okay.
would get to stay up, and I started watching it with him. And he was just kind of passively watching it. And this show just felt so different because I would watch like, Superstars, in the
Hmm.
morning where it's
Yeah.
just, and you've been watching some of that old stuff lately. So,
Yep.
it's just very like regimented. They have an intro, they have a bunch of squash matches. Maybe every once in a while something exciting happens. But UWF always started, this is what I loved. It always started with the end of the previous show. You'd see the last
Yeah.
30 seconds of the previous
Okay.
show, which usually ended in some kind of wild brawl. And then they didn't do a big opener. They usually had this, like, if you notice, like the music would just start playing during the recap, and then they just go to the super quick graphic that was like 3 seconds long, and then they'd go into the show. And so when I started looking through these episodes, I found this particular episode. And this particular episode, I have not watched since
Like,
since it
yeah.
first aired. But when I found it, I remembered that show
Hmm.
almost start to finish. I remembered almost every segment. I remembered specific things Jim Ross said. And I remembered because the main event of the show was Fantastics against Eddie Gilbert and Sting for the tag titles.
Yeah. You said
Yeah.
specific things Jim Ross said. He
Yeah.
says breaking down in Tulsa. Is
Yeah.
that
It's
like the
breaking
first
down in
time he ever
Tulsa.
said it?
I
Or
don't know if that's the first time, but that's one of the things he would, yeah.
yeah, it's a
That was
signature
definitely one
call.
of the things. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember him saying he hit his dad because
Oh,
Eddie
okay.
Gilbert's
Yeah, yeah,
dad was
yeah,
the
yeah.
referee.
Yeah.
So there's controversy,
Mhm.
titles get held up, and like the next week on TV, they announce Fantastics versus Eddie Gilbert and Sting for the held up tag titles at the Marriott in Oklahoma City. Buy your tickets now.
Oh,
And that
okay.
was the first time I ever got my dad to take me to a wrestling show in person. It was because of this TV
Wow.
show. So when I
Wow.
found it,
Okay. Okay. So
all
yeah.
these joyful memories
Yeah,
flooded
of
up.
course. And I gotta say, like, as I'm watching, and I didn't watch UWF during this time period.
Mm,
Since then, I've gone back and, I read the wrestling magazines. So I kinda had an idea of what was going on,
hmm.
but I've never seen this Ted DiBiase, for instance,
Yeah.
and I was thinking as I'm watching Ted DiBiase come out, and I'm thinking, "Man, when he showed up in the WWF a year later, and I didn't know who he was, and I'm just seeing the $1 Million Man, and, I was into the character. You
Hmm.
must have been like, "Oh, man."
My mind was
Like
blown
yeah.
because I became a fan after, because he was like the heel in Mid
Yeah. Oh,
South
okay, okay.
before they became UWF. He was like the top heel, and I never saw that. I only knew him
As a babyface.
as yeah, wearing like the yellow and white sweaters, and
Coming out to
like,
Born in the USA, that was
yeah,
him, right?
coming up to Born in the USA, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I only knew him as that. So yeah, when he showed up in WWF as $1 Million Man, I was like mind blown. Yeah.
But not just mind blown, like, you must have been, like, disappointed almost. Like,
I
'cause
I was, but then it didn't take long to realize how great of a bad guy he
yeah.
was.
But you see Hacksaw Jim Duggan, I mean, he
Yeah.
just played the
The
exact
Hacksaw
same
was definitely
character.
disappointing. Yeah,
Well, Hacksaw was the same character. I mean,
yeah.
like, from what I
But
noticed, Terry Taylor, I mean, he never
right.
really changed.
Yeah.
Michael Hayes, like
Yeah.
Doc
Dr.
Hendricks.
Death pretty much said the same. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Dr. Death, but I mean, he didn't show up till years later.
Right. Right. Right.
In WCW and Crockett,
Hmm.
it was the same guy.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I caught. But one thing like I noticed was like you watched the show and within I think it was like 20 minutes before we actually got to a match.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but they, they were explaining everything. And if you were a new fan and if this was the first time you watched, and for me, this was the first time I
Hmm.
watched, you knew what was going on
Yeah.
immediately. And I it was funny because you sent me another clip
Yeah.
of 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
So it would have been, I think it was the September 13th show, I want to say, or September 6th.
September 6th.
Yeah. So they do rankings.
Yeah.
And Jim Ross explains that they put everything into a computer and they spit them out and they got dot matrix printers and everything. And that was all funny. But
Yeah.
what I thought was amazing about this was they had these rankings and they have a top 10 instead of the top 5 that AEW has now.
Mhm.
And the top 10 rankings, I'd only watched that one episode, which was 2 weeks earlier.
Mhm.
Every single person on their rankings, except for one, was on that episode. And you knew that they were big deals.
Yeah.
So when you got the rankings, like these rankings made total sense to me.
Right.
Because I had just watched and okay, yeah, that guy's a big, like maybe you could quibble about the, where they are on the rankings. And Jim Ross even brought that up. He said, oh,
Right.
People think Ted DiBiase should be ranked ahead of One Man Gang or something.
Right. Right.
But it was funny because I think 9 out of the 10, the only one that wasn't on the show I watched was The Missing Link. And everyone else
Missing Link was always on and I hated him. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, and for whatever reason he wasn't on this show.
Yeah.
And there was other wrestlers on the show that weren't in the rankings, but you knew, like on the card that we watched, like there was, the opener was Joe Savaldi and Mustafa Mendoza. It's like, you're watching this match, this is the only reason this match is here is so that Michael Hayes can do a promo.
So that Michael Hayes, can cut a promo while he's doing commentary and still calls the match though.
Yeah. And I mean, the match was fine. Joe Savoldi's a good worker. And then Savannah Jack and Ken Massey, I mean, same thing. Although they did an angle afterwards, right, with Savannah Jack, because
they did like a promo, like Skandar Akbar set up which when I looked at the results, it was actually setting up a Jim Duggan match next week.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So I've got that. I've actually got that up here because they got the whole. With Savannah Jack, right, so he gets a win over Ken Massey to set up a bigger match with Jim Duggan. So that makes sense. And then we get the Fabulous Freebirds, who they had a schmoz with Bart Sawyer and Gary Young, a couple great workers, and then you had the main event, and you had some skits in there. You had Missy Hyatt with John Tatum and
Hollywood
Eddie Gilbert.
John Tatum. Yeah, you get to see the one of the beginnings of the never book an affair. Angles.
And they weren't even subtly hinting about it in commentary. Like it was like this guy's in trouble.
Yeah,
they kept bringing
everyone saw it.
Yeah, but I'm watching this and it's like it reminded me of, because again I grew up on AWA, so it was nothing like this. And then we got WWF and it was Superstars, which is nothing like this. And even when we got Main Event on NBC, like that was better matches, but it was not this. This reminded me of Attitude Era Raw in a way. Little bit of Nitro. The whole idea of an authority figure and talking about contracts and stuff like that. Like this is stuff that people joke about now. And they say, oh, we don't need that in wrestling. We don't need authority figures. People shouldn't be talking about their contracts. They were doing this 38 years ago. And it was good.
Yeah.
When people talk about we don't need promos and we don't need skits, we want good promos and skits. And that's what this was. Like I'm watching this now and I'm appreciating it for how good it is. Yeah. So I can imagine what it would have been like back then.
It was surprisingly good watching it. Like I was preparing myself for being like, this isn't going to hold up.
Disappointed?
Like, yeah. Like, when you go back and watch old Attitude Era stuff, you're like, man, the high points were still high points, but man, a lot of that wasn't as good as I remember. But I was like, this was a good TV. It was just
and the AWA
fun. It moved fast. Yeah. and even the there were a lot of like, these guys like Gustavo Mendoza, and there was a guy called the
Yeah.
Glass Man and things like that were just like the local jobbers, or not local, but they were just the designated jobbers. But even then, they kind of like
The Libyan is on the next
yeah,
show.
the Libyan. They would have what's the phrase of like every match is a promo and every promo is a match.
Yeah, yeah.
Like even when they had squash matches, they were like they were usually using it to like catch you up on speed on something. They wouldn't just throw a match out and just have it be a match. Like you would have like Michael Hayes ranting about it, or they'd have some guest commentator. And then usually this show actually ended with a promo
Yeah.
of Hacksaw Duggan pulling kind of a Mark Briscoe, like proto Mark Briscoe, like jumping up and saying, cutting a promo on Scandal Akbar, setting up next week. And they didn't announce anything for the next week. But like the way that they would lay out the shows, it would always start exciting, it would always end exciting. And so you just couldn't wait. I mean, when I was 14 years old, I would be so juiced after watching UWF.
Well, and you, I'm sure you would know, like, because of how this show started, the next week is going to start, and they're going to show you highlights of this tag team match and the squads that happened. They're going to tell you that the tag titles are held up. They're going to remind you to buy tickets to Oklahoma City, and then they're going to show you the Hacksaw Duggan promo, and then they're going to announce, and today on the show, Hacksaw Duggan is going to face Hollywood John Tatum.
Yeah.
In the main event, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then and then we had so I can see already how that would have gone, and we would have had the Freebirds were all over the show. Like watching one show, the big guys are the Freebirds.
Yep.
Terry Taylor, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Ted DiBiase, Eddie Gilbert, John Tatum.
Right.
Sting was a champion, but he was not quite yet. Sting, he was.
That was another reason why I picked it, was just to.
He wasn't big. I was surprised. They said he was big, but I'm looking at him and he was tiny.
Apparently, that was around the time he quit doing steroids.
Okay, because he looked like.
Yeah. But he still had his Blade Runners. He still had his Blade Runner tights on,
and he's smiling, and like he's supposed to be a heel, and he's doing the heel moves, but he's got the big smile on his face, like you could just tell he wasn't going to work as a heel. And it was like a year later before they finally turned him, I think.
It was about a year later.
It was Starrcade '87, he was still teaming with Eddie, but the fans were cheering him by then. He was in the main event, and he was a tag team champion. So it's like so it's kind of a little bit of what's the word? Kismet?
Full circle,
full circle,
foreshadowing.
So it's cool that you picked this, and
with a smaller partner, because Eddie Gilbert was about Darby size,
with a smaller blonde partner, and but the partner was the worker in this case, and Sting was he didn't do much. He did a couple like rest holds in the middle, and I think he did one jump, and he didn't have any of his signature moves yet.
No,
he was very, very green here, but he didn't look bad or anything. He didn't do anything. And the Fantastics, it was interesting because the Fantastics, they came out to Sharp Dressed Man.
Yeah.
And when I was watching AWA, which would have been a couple years before this, we had the Fabulous Ones that came out to Sharp Dressed Man. So that's when I heard the music. I thought, oh, it's the Fabulous Ones, and then
they cribbed a lot off of each other. Yeah, that's funny. Because to me, the Fabulous Ones ripped off the Fantastics, but because I had no idea they were around way before the Fantastics. Like the Fantastics were like the knockoff team.
Yeah, and they were all the Rock and Roll Express,
right?
And I thought Ric Flair ripped off Nick Bockwinkel. So it depends where you grew up, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, for me. Normally when we do this show, I'm going to have the guest on and we're going to talk about what they had. And I'm glad you had you on, because I got to see something I'd never seen before. And it brought me joy just watching it today.
Oh, great.
In 2024.
Yeah.
But I also want to talk about something that brought me joy. And it's actually, again, what kind of gave me the idea to do this show. And over the, if this show keeps going, hopefully it does, and I may come up with a few others, but on this one, I wanted to bring it up. And you could see it if you were around right at the beginning of the feed. We had, or at the beginning of the show, we had this up while we were waiting to get going. Where is it here? Right here. And this was mine. And so for me, I grew up in Central Canada, and we got Stampede Wrestling up here. And Owen Hart was for whatever reason, he was one of my favorites, when I was a teenager. I think I liked him because he was smaller, so he kind of reminded me of myself. And we're both like, I have broader shoulders, and especially when I worked out, like I occasionally got, oh, are you a wrestler and stuff, and I don't think anybody would mistake me for that now, but back
Mhm.
then, and I always kind of identified with Owen. Now he was the younger brother, and I was always the older brother. But I have aunts and uncles that are closer in age to me than my siblings. So in a way, I kind of felt like the younger brother to my aunts and uncles. So I think in that way, I identified a little bit with Owen, maybe like a Chavo Guerrero, Eddie Guerrero kind of thing.
Mhm.
But so I was always behind Owen. I don't know if I knew that he was the Blue Blazer when he debuted in
Oh, really?
WWF
Uh-huh.
originally. Yeah, I'm not sure if I knew that right away. Eventually, I did. But then when he became, a singles wrestler, I think when I first started to get behind, like, kind of noticed him was, basically when they started heading into this match with Brett that they would have at
Yeah.
WrestleMania 10 was in the lead up to Survivor Series. And so when they were tagging, and you could kind of see Owen getting jealous, and I
Mhm.
identified with them. And the other thing is I never really liked Brett. So just for whatever reason, I just never liked him. I just thought he was phony. Even when he was, when he was in the tag team, I always liked Neidhart better. I always thought, oh, he always calls himself the excellence of execution, but it's always Neidhart that gets the moves. Like that's
Yeah.
me as a young fan. And then the announcers would constantly be telling you how great he was, and I'm just like, shut up about Brett already. Tell me about Jim Neidhart.
That's so
That's
funny.
me, right? Like how
Yeah.
I thought as a fan. And the guys he was feuding with, I always liked. So when he feuded with Savage, I liked Savage. When he feuded with Macho Man, or when he feuded with Mr. Perfect, I liked Mr. Perfect. Bulldog, I liked Bulldog. So I always was rooting for the guys he was against. So when it came time to go with Owen, and I could see that, oh, we're heading to a match, and are we going to actually
Mhm.
see this? And a lot of times you hear like people say, oh, I don't want to see brothers fight each other, like with Matt and Jeff Hardy, or
Mhm.
even I remember me criticizing Dax and Cash, like I didn't want
Mhm.
to see them fight. But with Brett and Owen, like I wanted to see this match, but I knew Brett was gonna win. But I just
Yeah.
wanted Owen to at least give him a good match, and maybe do something, maybe cheat and like hurt him. Like that's kind of what I was hoping for. And so I watched the match, and I remember I used to always watch with my best friend Doug, and we get all the pay-per-views together. And this time it was I think it was, I don't know if it was the weekend he got married, or if it was his anniversary. But for that reason, he wasn't actually with me watching the show. So I was watching it by myself. And when Owen won, and he was a big Owen Hart fan too. So when Owen Hart won, I was so happy, but I was by myself. I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it.
Oh.
And then I had to I couldn't um I couldn't like spoil it for him. So I just like so we ended up watching it together again. And I watched it a second time, and I didn't he was so impressed that I didn't spoil it for him. And I just remember like watching this and just being just so happy when it was over. It's funny
Yeah.
because it's a
Yeah.
heel that won, and I'm sure
Right.
98% of the people watching were probably upset. Although I think a lot of people kind of liked Owen and respected him and everything. So
Yeah.
probably not like you'd be upset if like The Miz beat, like
Right.
Daniel Bryan or something.
Brett was
You know,
probably my favorite wrestler at that point.
really? Okay. So
But
how
I
did you
was
feel when you
so
watched?
happy when Owen won.
Oh, you were. Okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
thought it was awesome.
So would you say you were already like more of a different kind of fan that was looking at wrestling a little bit differently than just,
Um,
like
yeah, I think at that point I didn't have any sort of like I didn't like,
you'd have The
know
Observer or
about the
anything?
Observer, any kind of
Okay.
that kind of
No, me
stuff.
neither. Me neither.
No, I would still read probably. I probably was not reading the aftermags by that point, but
It's kind
but
of the
I
same
was
for
but I
me.
was
Yeah.
aware enough to know, you know,
You
that
knew
there
he
was
was
a
good,
mind
and you knew he
behind
was
it,
okay.
who was plotting things. And I had little notebooks and I would book my own,
Oh, really?
tournaments and stuff. Yeah. So like I had an idea of what booking was and, all that. And so when that happened and I remember thinking to myself, this is so perfect that Brett, when it was over and Brett wins the title at the end of the show, I
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
that's perfect storytelling. I was
Well,
like,
you knew you were
that's
gonna get 6 months of world title
right.
matches. Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
loved I was just so happy. And I same as you, even though I was a huge Brett fan, I thought Owen was incredible and I was and always better than they presented him because he was in, Koki Beware team or he was in the
Yeah,
new foundation and it was always like he's so much better than this. Why can't. And
and
so
then
to
he gets that
see him
singles.
break through like that was just spectacular.
And when he got that main event at SummerSlam, or I don't know
Yeah.
if actually it might not have been the main event. I think Taker versus Taker was the actual main event. But when he got the world title match at SummerSlam, my buddy Duggan and I, we there was a problem with our cable company. For some
Oh no.
reason, like we weren't able to watch it. So we were literally driving around to try to find places that were showing the match.
Uh-huh.
And we eventually found a place and we got there just as the world title match was starting. So we got to see it. And of course
Nice.
we got to see the Bulldog and Neidhart show up.
Mm,
That I think Neidhart had been around in the lead up, but the Bulldog was a surprise, or it might have been the other way around.
I don't really remember.
Yeah, but I just remember, like, at that time I had no inside knowledge of anything. So, I was watching all of this as a fan and just,
Hmm.
super happy. Obviously disappointed that Owen lost, but happy that he had a great match and that I knew that there was bigger things coming for him. And, then
Yeah.
they would do the Survivor Series match later, that the submission match, I think, with Backlund. So yeah, I followed it all the way along. And then when they finally reunited, it was about a 6 months period. That was the only time I was ever a Bret Hart fan, was when he reunited with Owen until the screw
Yeah.
job. And then when he
Hmm.
went to WCW, it was like, okay,
He's
you're
dead to you.
gone. I'm here now.
He's dead to you.
Yeah, because I was a WWE guy. So yeah, that's always the one that, like, and whenever
Yeah.
I've watched it again, like it just makes me
It
happy.
holds up so well.
And then when he won the King of the Ring, and
Yeah.
he says, and Brett had lost his title, and he says, "Brett, you're a loser, and I'm a king." I was
Yeah.
just, yes.
King of Hearts. Yes.
No, I just love that line. You're
Yeah.
a loser, and I'm a king. I
Yeah.
was just like, oh my god, he was so great.
I
Kicked your
love that
leg on
they
your leg, and
yeah.
yeah,
I love that he was clean. He went over clean
yeah, yeah,
and
absolutely,
he just beat him.
yeah,
And that to me was such a nice touch. You could tell that like Brett probably had a lot of,
yeah.
a lot of say in that they decided to do that. That it wasn't like some dastardly heel turn where he used chloroform or powder, like or something like that. It was
As
just
an
he
Owen fan, I wouldn't have minded,
yeah.
but but
I know.
but I was
But
happy, yeah,
but it was even
especially
better
now
that
in
he
ret
out wrestled him.
Yes, exactly, because that made the rematches more credible,
Yeah.
and you could
Yeah.
actually believe, and I honestly, I'll bet you at some point, Brett probably wanted to put him over for the title, and
Yeah.
Vince was just, "No, I'm not
Yeah.
putting the world title on Owen Hart," you
Yeah.
know? But, yeah, and it's too bad because, it's, obviously, he would die a few years later, and, we
Mhm.
never really got to see, whether or not, I think he probably still had a nice run left in him, I would think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, especially with the way things changed in like 2001 and stuff, with Kurt Angle and Eddie Guerrero and
Oh
guys like
gosh,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, like the kind of matches he could have had. But
Mhm.
it is what it is. And Martha's doing some great things now, so there we have that. But yeah, I
Yeah.
can always look back at that day, March 20th. So it's almost, yeah, just almost exactly 30 years ago, actually, now that I think about it.
Oh
I
yeah.
should have done this show 2 weeks ago. 'Cause it was March 20th,
Yeah.
1994. So yeah, just over 30 years ago. That yeah, Owen Hart, basically became a made man. He was a main eventer for a while, never not an upper mid carder from that point on. So yeah, so that was good, and we got you talking about the UWF. Now, before we go,
Mhm.
I do want to ask, if what is the most recent thing that you saw that you can think of that made you happy? And
Um,
not counting Sting. Yeah, that's a
not
cheap
count. Yeah,
code.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
a cheap
that's too
code.
easy.
Yeah.
Um, probably that same night, Will Ospreay showing up in that match with Takeshita.
Oh, yeah? Just the whole
I
match in
just,
general, or anything particular in it?
just, I hadn't really thought about it too much, but I think that's the last time I remember having. There are times, and I've talked about this sometimes of like, specifically not just AEW, but the AEW is the one that does it most often to me, where I'll sit there and literally think, I love pro wrestling while
Yeah.
watching something. And That match, for totally different reasons than all the reasons we talked about here. Most of it just because you're just seeing people at the peak.
Yeah.
Like this is like the state of the art of this craft is what you're watching.
And you're going to get to see him like
Yeah,
regularly now. You're not going
and
to have to.
just watching two guys that are at the peak of this craft who completely clearly trust each other to just let off the brakes, just put the, just push it as hard as they can because they know they're going to take care of each other. That was probably the last time I was just like, wow, take my money.
I am going to post a link. I'm not sure if I could actually play this on the show, because I'm not sure what YouTube's rules are, but I'm going to post this link. It's from YouTube. So this made me happy watching it just yesterday, believe it or not. And I'm going to tweet this out too. But you got to see this. And I'll tell you the story. It's this woman, Sophia Rose, who is on OVW TV, which I watch. And I've been watching her for a couple weeks, and I don't know anything about her, and she's just all of a sudden they're getting a push. And then I saw this video and I was like, oh my God, like I watched this. She is a survivor of a stroke, and
wow.
she was recovering in the hospital, learning how to speak, learning how to talk, learning how to walk again, and saw, this is her story, saw OVW on the TV and looked at it and says, I want to do that. And this became her inspiration. And now here she
Wow.
is doing it. And she's very green, like very green.
Yeah.
And
who
I
cares?
at first I'm watching and like I was like, why is she even on TV? Like but then I didn't know the
Yeah.
story. And now that I know the story, like I can't not root for her. And I'm not sure, she may also be hearing impaired, because like she kind of sounds that way in the thing,
Mhm.
or it might be part of like her
Which
learning
yeah.
to talk. I'm not positive, but
Mhm.
there's subtitles in the video. I urge anybody to watch it, and I'll tweet it out after too. And if you don't feel happy after watching this,
That's
then
awesome.
you don't have a heart.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my recommendation for everybody after this. Go watch this video. Sophia Rose.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That
So
did just remind me something that's less meaningful than that, but something that did make happy this week was this video. I think I posted it in the Fight Game Discord of it was a little kid who was crying
yes,
because The Rock killed Cody.
they put it on Raw tonight. They actually aired that on Raw.
Oh,
So
that's
this is the
great.
first time I had seen it, because
Yeah.
you know me, I don't watch clips. The only reason I saw this one was because they actually aired it on the show. So
Gotcha.
if they hadn't have aired it on the show, I wouldn't have saw it. And it's only got like 1,000 views. So like I think if this story blows up, like this is like an E60 thing. Like
Yeah.
at some point, like it's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
So yeah. So I'm glad we did this, and I'll be back
that's
next
fun.
week.
Thank you.
No problem. I don't know who my guests will be. I know I have had a few people ask, and I've got a list, so I just gotta schedule someone for next week. I will be back next week, 11 p.m. Central, or 10 p.m. Central, 11 Eastern. Hopefully you'll all be here watching, and hopefully you'll have some more too. So for Kevin, I've been Paul, and this has been The Joy of Wrestling.